Watch fam, recently I polled all of you on a YouTube polling system and I tricked you all. I found out some imperative information about Rolex versus Omega that we'll get into today.
I don't understand why you're
What is up, Watch fam? My name is Michael. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Are you looking for a website or a domain? Well, then Squarespace is the place to go. So if you're interested, you can use our code right down there and get 10% off your first order of a website or a domain. Today, we are talking, well, Christian, okay, so hold on real quick. Christian's not here, obviously, for two different reasons. One was he just was in Switzerland for an entire week, working very, very hard. Normally, I would make a joke about his tan getting stronger and everything like that, but I actually was supposed to go to Switzerland and film with Longines, and I got COVID the day before, so I couldn't go. So Christian dragged all of this gear by himself to Switzerland, did all this work, worked super hard, and I still have COVID, so he couldn't be here anyways. But then the best news is this month has been horrible, and to make it even better, all the gear is currently lost in the sky, in the Switzerland sky. So hopefully we get that back. But right now, Christian is taking a much-deserved nappy-wappy. Today, like I said, this video is about, last thing, it is literally 500 degrees in the studio right now, so my hair is deflating, I am sweating, I still have COVID, so that's definitely not helping either. My throat hurts, although my singing voice has gotten significantly better since I've gotten COVID, so either way, I'm going to be sweaty and messy, and today should be, hopefully, a good video, because I reached out to all of you on a YouTube post and I said, this next video is going to be about Rolex versus Omega. Why do you like Rolex? Why do you like Omega? Why do you think Rolex is winning? Why do you think Omega is winning? So on and so forth. And I kind of knew what you all were going to say, but I did notice something else about what you all said, which was interesting. And during this video, we'll go over just some things that I noticed about Rolex that I feel like is their key to success in terms of selling a lot of watches. That is pretty, when you look at it, you're like, oh, that's painfully obvious, but I never looked at it at this angle before. So hopefully it's at least somewhat interesting. I don't have Christian here, so I'm talking to myself in a swelteringly hot room. But anyways, we'll get into that in 1 second. The opening thing I wanted to talk about before we get to that subject, though, is Chanel. Chanel, if you don't know Chanel, you need to watch a different video before you watch this one. But Chanel, very prominent jewelry brand that also makes watches, but when it comes to them making watches, also makes watches means they basically outsource all of their work to other watch brands. But that does not mean that these watches are not good. It just means they're not really, it doesn't seem like they're birthed from Chanel. It's Chanel taking money, being like, hey, we want to have watches now, so let's do watches. And the company that takes the money is like, okay, how about this one? And they're like, okay. Either way, there's a lot of, with jewelry brands and watches, it's either you pulled it off like Cartier did a very long time ago, Cartier, or you didn't, like some people would say Chanel did not do. But for me, one of the things is that I, obviously, like most people, form over function sometimes wins out. It hasn't really yet with watches with me. The one exception I may have is Tiffany watches. I feel like are kind of that like jewelry company does watch, but I just think those are so beautiful that it works out, which is the bigger point of all this. If it's beautiful, it works out. But, the one watch I should say that I want from a jewelry company that's not really the most beautiful watch I've ever seen, but the Hermes Cape Cod I want, just because I'm from Cape Cod, and I love Cape Cod. So that would be the one that I want. But today, we're briefly looking at Chanel and the J12. I feel like that's Chanel's most popular watch. I think they said it makes 2/3 of all their sales. Hodinkee just did an excellent review on it. And looking at it, it's made of ceramic, which I think is very cool. It comes in white ceramic, which is the top of my list. And there's even this version where most of it is white ceramic, and then like one sliver of it is black ceramic, which I think is beautiful. The colors of it are beautiful. It's 200 meters water resistance. It's a pretty good movement. It's nothing to write home about, but it works. It keeps time. And it's inspired by yachting, so it's an alternative to the Yachtmaster, and it's like $7,000. So it's also not that expensive. Well, obviously, I'm talking about in this market, it's not very expensive. But I don't think this is Chanel's winner. They have a lot of different versions of the J12. There's ones with jewels, there's ones with tourbillons, there's a ton of stuff, but I just feel like they need to go back to their design board and do something a little different. I feel like starting off with the diver, especially one that has to do with yachting, is very Chanel. I guess to a degree it's very rich, but I just feel like the design isn't there, and it may just be the material, which normally I'd really like, but just a straight polished ceramic watch, which is ceramic everywhere, to me ends up just making it kind of look like a mall plastic watch, which I never thought I'd say because I love ceramic, and I guess that's not true because I want to look at, if I'm looking at the AP Royal Oak in white ceramic, and I think it's a small detail, but I think the biggest thing that they do here is the crown on the AP is also ceramic, or it's at least white, when in Chanel, the J12, the crown is not. It's steel, which immediately, when I look at that, I'm like, oh, that's a Michael Kors mall watch. And I think it may be that it's not a continuous design, the ceramic doesn't go throughout, or it's just that every single thing looks highly, highly polished. I don't think you can brush ceramic that easily. I can't even tell, honestly, if this AP is brushed ceramic, but I feel like just the all polishing makes it look a lot cheaper than it actually is. I would love to see more jewelry companies taking a kind of jewelry approach to regular watches and make them like what Chanel was trying to do, which is a very artistic watch that clearly is from a house of design and not a house of watchmaking. But I feel like right now Chanel kind of sadly hits neither of those, where it doesn't really look like either way. Like the split white and black, I feel like would be brilliant if the watch was beautiful, but it's not that beautiful. Anyways, just want to hear what your thoughts on that are, so definitely let me know. I also saw the code Coco, which is an incredible watch from Chanel. It's a women's watch, but I feel like that design is what Chanel could do to a more popular men's watch. Somehow, some way. Maybe they even just took like, I don't know, the actual watch part, like see where it's all embezzled with diamonds or whatever. They took that part out, made it a strap, put it on a watch, and beefed up the size. Boom. Amazing, cool Chanel watch. Anyways, that's that. Okay, so before we get into Rolex versus Omega, we're going to talk about Squarespace real quick, but also shout out to Mike, the editor, our editor. He does all of the lives. I have stopped this recording about 15 times now to cough and to hack up mucus, and he's just staring at it in his room and cutting it out and making it seem like that never happened. So shout out to Mike. This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Do you need a website or a domain, or maybe both? Well, then Squarespace is the place to go. If you need a website, especially if you're starting just a blog, an e-commerce website, just a website where you post one picture and you never use it again, or if you just want to get a domain and you may want to do this later, Squarespace is the best place to go. They have tons and tons of templates that you can use, both free and paid, to get your website up immediately. And in 2022, a website is basically one of the most important things that you can possibly have. It immediately adds validity to almost anything that you're doing. If someone says, can I talk to you about this service that you offer for work? Sure, here's my website. Like Christian always says, it is a digital business cards and one of the most important things that you can have now. I'm actually making a website through Squarespace right now for a clothing brand that I'm starting up, and I already hired a web designer to do it once, and it cost me a lot of money and it looked horrible. Squarespace, I actually did by myself in, I could have probably done it in an hour. I took a little longer because I was trying to get it just how I like it, but incredibly quick and way cheaper. And in what I paid, I designed it myself easily with the help from the theme, got it up, got it running, and it was good to go. And everything was integrated. So I definitely recommend you check out Squarespace, and you can use our code Theo Harris to save 10% off your first order of a website or domain. So check it out immediately. Okay, so I'm going to try and talk quieter so I stop coughing in editor Mike's ears, but we're talking Omega versus Rolex today, which we've talked about before, but I've never reached out to you all, the audience, to see what you think of the two brands. Why do you like one better than the other? And what was interesting was the overwhelming majority of you all said Omega, but the tone of how you said, I like Omega better, wasn't like, I like Omega better. It was like, I should like Omega better, so I do. Thank you, Michael. Have a good night. That's the sentiment I see with a lot of people in the watch world, like watch nerds. They're like, oh yeah, I should like Omega way better, and I should like this brand way better, I should like that brand way better. And you're like, so what is your collection like? And they're like, oh my, it's amazing. It's a Datejust, it's a date, it's the OP, it's the Daytona, it's the Submariner, it's the Yachtmaster, and that's it. And you're like, wow. Weird. Today, I kind of took all of your answers, boiled them down to a little pros and cons list, and then we'll end with some things that I noticed about Rolex that I never really noticed before. Okay, so real quick, here's a pros and pros list. Pros of Omega, pros of Rolex. Pros of Omega. Better movement technology. They obviously have Master Chronometer, which blows basically everybody out of the water. That not only means the watches are incredibly accurate, but also they're resistant to even more than just water. They're also resistant to magnetism and shock and all this different stuff. So is Rolex and a lot of other brands, but Master Chronometer is a very strict way to measure watches. Kind of a pro for Omega, but we'll get into it in a little bit too. Omega has way more designs and options. They're always available, way better customer experiences working with Omega, and they appeal to watch nerds. So, for example, the original Speedmaster that went to the moon has a Hesselite crystal. Omega still offers a Speedmaster with a Hesselite crystal. They're very, very faithful to watch nerds. If watch nerds like something about Omega, chances are Omega will take that and put it into a watch exactly how you want it. Even if Speedy Tuesday edition, Omega is in touch with you. People said in the comments especially, they'd reach out to Omega and ask them a question or just say something, and Omega would be like, thank you so much for being a customer. Here's the answer. Which is not what you get with Rolex. Rolex is kind of like, shut up. Did you buy the watch? Is it on your wrist? Good. Bye. Now, there's not as many obvious pros for Rolex, which is a very weird thing to say. It's just that the pros that are for Rolex are very, very important. So, better and cohesive design, a lot of you said. Feel like you understand their watch lineup immediately. I actually said that, which is the main topic of this video that we'll get into. And then, this is me. You really, not any of you really gave any pros to Rolex, even though that's not true. But, and then finally the crown, the logo of Rolex is just, what else would you want on your wrist besides a crown type deal? You know what I mean? So those are the pros of each. Rolex obviously has great movements, great technology. They're basically vertically integrated and they make everything into a very high regard, and it's fabulous. We all know this. It's not a shock. But there is a bigger discussion under all of that. Recently, I saw online that Netflix, Peacock, what are some other ones? Hulu, HBO Max, whatever, are essentially seeing that they now have too much content on their servers. There's too many options for people to choose from. So the big problem is, this really sounds like I'm setting you up for an ad to buy cable. I'm not. But the big problem is, most people have fatigue and they don't know what channel to watch on TV or what show to watch, because it's not, you're on the Discovery Channel, you're going to watch whatever they tell you with a smooth narrated voice. They're like, you could watch any show from the Discovery Channel and any other show in existence that was ever created. And people can't do that because it's like, I don't even know what to look for, so I'm going to just watch what I know. There's too many things out here for me to experiment. And I feel like, to a degree, Omega does that. And it's very weird to get into, which we will later a little bit more intensely, but some of you said they have way too many limited editions, not a cohesive brand story around Omega, and then bad bracelets. That's a lot of you also said Omega bracelets are not that good, but that's not what we're focusing on today. And you may be surprised to know that when we are comparing Rolex and Omega, it certainly does feel like there are a lot more Omega models than Rolex, but in reality, from what I can tell, there's really not. There's 13 or 14 Rolex models, and there's 13 or 14 Omega models, which is very weird. Although, obviously, that discounts the fact that with Omega, for example, there is the James Bond edition Seamaster, there's the Dark Side of the Moon, there's the Light Side of the Moon, there's the Moon, there's the Moon, and there's more Moon. Plus 3, there's a lot of different special editions in Omega, which makes it seem like everything is a lot more populated, but their core models, there's really not that many. And then, if we're flipping it back to Rolex, the main con that everybody says, they're impossible to get. I can't get them, which is really not a con. That's just, well, it is a con, obviously, for the brand, but that's, you know what I mean? How bad is that? That's like saying, that girl is too beautiful. I can't date her. She's too good looking. She doesn't like me. Is it a con for them or for you? You know, that's kind of the issue there. But anyways, the other thing that I would bring up before we get into the bigger discussion is Omega's other thing is when people said they lack a brand story, which is very interesting because I would say Omega's brand story right now is we did everything Rolex did, but better. We went higher, we went farther, we went faster, we went lower. Any possible direction, we did it more than Rolex did. Isn't that cool? And Rolex is not really responding to that, which may seem weird, but I think the world is not really enchanted with what's happening right now. It's kind of a surprise that we didn't do something already. So if Omega's like, well, we went to the center of the earth, we're like, really? I thought we did that like years ago. I feel like there's a disenchantment with the modern day world, and Omega is trying to prove itself in a world where everything has already been proved. So it's all cool what they do, and the technology is amazing, but the larger consumer base is like, nah, that's not that fun. What about the guy that did it first? And Rolex is like, oh, you mean the guy that first scaled Mount Everest? Yeah, that was us. And I feel like by doing that, Rolex stays in this like romantic view of the past where they made watches that outfitted these super tough men that don't exist anymore. They're all gone. And now it's just rich men in line to go up Mount Everest instead of that one crazy guy that went to the top and took a watch with him. So I feel like that's kind of a reason why Rolex is still leading the pack in their marketing, even though all that stuff was a while ago. That actually works out to its benefit, and it's one of those things that gets sweeter with age. When the other thing is, people will most likely never be enchanted with the present like they are the past. So Omega can't really catch up, except for the moon. And everybody loves the moon. Everybody loves the Speedmaster, because that's the first watch that went to the moon, and Omega has capitalized on it, and it has worked and worked and worked and worked. And that's part of the reason everybody loves the Speedmaster. It's an easy sell, but, if someone went to the moon again, I feel like they'd be like, oh, well, yeah, of course you take the Speedmaster or some other watch or just a computer now. This is why I think there is that big gap between Rolex and Omega. And this is the part I'm really interested to hear what you think, because this is kind of what I found out today. If Omega is a streaming service that releases a ton of content, Rolex, I feel like, is the old guy in a board meeting screaming, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And everybody that works for Rolex says, yes, that's a great idea, Mr. Hans Wilsdorf. And then they continue to do that. They continue to do exactly what they've always done, which is interesting. So if we look, now we're going to break down how Rolex sells a watch and how Omega sells a watch. Okay, so here's what's interesting. When you think of the Seamaster and the Speedmaster, you are probably picturing two watches. But when you go on Omega's website and you hover over Seamaster or Speedmaster, you are presented with 10 models under that name. It's like 4 under Seamaster, 6 under Speedmaster, which is interesting because it essentially means that you can get any of those watches that are Speedmaster, but also you probably know, if you're going to buy one of those, that one of them is the real Speedmaster, which is weird. So immediately there's all these other offshoots of the Speedmaster and not watches with their own identity, except kind of. There's the Heritage Speedmaster, the Speedmaster Reduced, the Speedmaster Moonwatch, the Speedmaster this, the Speedmaster that. The not Speedmaster. Long story short, what that means is if you are not familiar with Omega, you have to do a lot more work to get familiar and feel like you're in with the brand. Because anyone that is buying a watch like this most likely wants to feel like they know the talk. They can walk the walk. They're like, okay, this is your entire lineup. I want that one. But all of a sudden, it seems a little alienating to think, okay, Speedmaster shows these other watches that I'm not interested in, but they're all under the Speedmaster, whatever. Rolex, on the other hand, doesn't do that at all. If you go under Submariner, there are Submariners, and that's it. And to even take it a step further, Rolex essentially reuses all of their designs across all of their watches. And what I mean by that is when you're looking at Speedmasters, for example, or no, actually Seamasters would be an easier one to do. You can have the 300M, you can have the Planet Ocean, you can have the Aquaterra, you can have any other thing in their lineup that looks different. When on Rolex, if you look at Submariners, you get Submariners. And then to make things even easier for the consumer, you can look at Submariners, GMTs, Yachtmasters, and the Sea Dweller, and they're all essentially the same case design, so you could stick with the same case design that you like, but just pick the specifics of what you like. I like this case, but I want it thin, and it could be gold or whatever. I want the Yachtmaster. I want the thick, beefiest one. It could be the Sea Dweller. They're all separated. They're all under different names, and they're all a winning design that has proven itself to be winning again and again and again. And the same thing with Rolex is with the Oyster case in general. So you can get the Day-Date, the Datejust, the OP, the Air King, and the Milgauss, 5 of Rolex's offerings that are all using essentially the same case with very, very minor things switched around, so you feel like you have some more customization, but you're really just picking the winning formula in tiny different variations. So what's interesting, and well, you have the Daytona and the Sky Dweller, which I feel like are kind of different, but still a very, very similar design language. And what's interesting is that Rolex pitches all of these essentially very, very, very similar watches. I split them up into 4 categories. You could probably do 2, diver style watches and sport watches. And they sell them as 13 or 14 different watches, and they are all different watches, but just very subtly. When Omega, on the other hand, kind of does it the opposite, where they say, like, we have the Seamaster, the Speedmaster, the DeVille, this, that. We have 5 watch categories. There's 5 watches in each of those, and there's 10 designs of each of those 5. But you have essentially this mess of watches on their site that are all kind of different versions of the same thing, but in different ways and different styles. None of them have as solid identities as the Seamaster, the Speedmaster, the Constellation, the DeVille. Rolex, on the other hand, would take all of the variations of the models, split them up into different names, and put them separately. If we're talking about the website, for example. And Rolex would also greatly reduce the amount of designs, which is kind of the whole thing of this video. Rolex basically found 2 designs that work perfectly and said, how can we modify these just enough where they look different and it's worthy to get all of them, but they're all essentially the exact same design. So Oyster Case, through all of what, I'm ignoring Rolex's Cellini, which of course is the one that doesn't really sell that well. All of our watches use the Oyster Case, or a very, very similar style to the Oyster Case. Some of them have a movable bezel on top, and the other ones don't. Any one of them with a movable bezel on top, make sure it looks essentially the exact same as the other kinds. So like I said, Yachtmaster should look kind of the same as the Sub. And then we'll change the dial colors and a few other things, but you can get the same watch in a bunch of different flavors, and that's it. That's our entire market. When Omega is basically saying you could get any style of our watch in any flavor, and also we have sub-styles of each watch. So there's a lot more to choose from. And that's why I think Rolex constantly beats Omega. There's 2 designs for Rolex that do well. They essentially culled everything down to what sells the best, and that is all we will sell. When Omega is kind of shotgunning out all these beautiful designs, but with a bunch of things that, like, okay, maybe it doesn't sell the best, but we'll still release it because some people like it. And I think when you walk into a boutique and you see all of those, it dilutes the idea of, okay, there are 13 Rolexes, which one do I want, versus this huge collection of Omegas. Finally, of course, Rolex really just, I feel like, focuses on the mass market consumer. So does Omega, of course, but more to a degree of Rolex is like, okay, they don't need all of these crazy visuals about movement tech and this and that. They need a watch that's solidly water resistant. 100 meters is good. If we rate to 150, that's perfect. Slim watch that still does its job, that looks sporty and has a crown on it. And everybody's like, yes, that's what I want to buy. Omega, on the other hand, is doing every single thing it can. They're like, look at our movement tech, look at the beauty, look at these ones are dressy, these ones are sporty, these ones are this, these ones are that. And what happens at the end of the day, which is the end of this video, is all the watch nerds like us either like Omega better or know that you should like Omega better, because if you're a watch nerd, you want to see everything and see all the technology and be a fan of the company that's moving things forward in 80 different directions and doing all these crazy cool releases. But it's still tough at the end of the day to not like just something that works. The classic kind of, this is a style that has been around forever. Everybody likes this style of watch, and these are the guys that did it the best and did it first. And that would be Rolex. So, as always, when I do these comparisons, Rolex is Apple, Android is Omega. They're both amazing. They both have beautiful features. They're both getting better all the time and doing all these cool experimental things. But at the end of the day, everybody knows what an iPhone is, and a lot of people want one, and a lot of people know what an Android is and want one, but iPhone is always kind of going to be the leader. So anyways, hopefully that made sense. Like I said, I'm sorry. I was suffering from COVID for this entire video. Could make sense, could make no sense. I guess you'll have to see. But anyways, I will see you next week, hopefully with Christian.